Good morning to all of you. Maybe we could get everybody who I know is outside there trying to get their breakfast. We want to get our program started. I'm Clark Manis. I am a member of the Board of Directors, and I am the current interim executive director. But what I want to say before I get started is those of you who were there last night at the Curry Stone Prize, I want to again call out both Kate Storr and Cameron Sinclair for their great visionary opportunity in creating Architecture for Humanity. It's just a remarkable thing that this organization will continue on in terms of doing the things that we know that it needs to do. So we have a great program for today, good panel that we're going to get started with, and three of the four senior directors of Architecture for Humanity are here, and I want to turn this over to Sherry Lee. No, not yet.
I was going to change the time.
Okay, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the program today. So welcome.
I second that welcome. Thank you guys for coming out to our 4th annual conference. I'm going to kick it off pretty quick. First, want to say our thoughts are with the people in the Philippines right now who suffering from the typhoon. But so our first panel here is sustainable versus resilient materials, and I'm going to turn it over to Seth pretty quickly and let him talk about what the panel content's going to be about. Seth, you want to take it away? Do you have your own?
Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start just introducing a little bit of my background, and then I'll do introductions of our great panelists here, and then each of them will do a presentation of their own, and then we'll have a conversation. Then how do I begin? Okay, so I direct the Architecture and Community Design program at University of San Francisco, and it's a very social justice-oriented program. I work with student teams, mostly senior level, junior level. It's an undergraduate program, but we work on real projects for underserved communities, both locally and internationally. And a lot of it is around sustainability and resilience in both materials and social issues in the context we're working. Just a few examples. This is a health clinic for Haiti, and this was for Medicare International. It's a NGO that does emergency relief. And in this project, we're looking at the traditional colombage hybrid in Haiti, the gingerbread, which survived the earthquake extremely well when everything else collapsed. We're looking at possibly reintroducing that craft, which has been lost, both to create job opportunities and also bring back a traditional building type. And looking at new innovative connections that will even improve the quality of that system as it stands. This is another project for a Bedouin Arab community in the Negev desert in southern Israel. Here we're looking at how we can take a community that's lost its ability to be nomadic as they have been traditionally and create a healthy cultural center to reconstitute the way that they conduct their lives. Here we're looking at, they have no money, so we're looking at ways of producing buildings essentially for free. This was a break shelter for sugarcane plantation workers in Colombia, in the Andes. And here we're working with the 5-inch, 6-inch diameter guadua bamboo. The most sustainable material probably on the planet. And there it's in construction. So the students in the program are getting the opportunity to design, work interactively with the community, and then travel to help build what they've developed with with that partnership. Here we're in near Leon, Nicaragua, and building a plaza for a community center that the team designed the previous academic year. And that's the building as it stands now. And that building is rammed earth, so it's using local materials. When they dig pit privys, we use that material in the ramming with about 10% cement. Here's a project we're working on right now. It's a leadership center for the Maasai tribe in northern Tanzania. And that's going to be a combination of earth and thatch. Okay, so that's just an introduction to me briefly. I'd like to start off, introduce Paul O'Connor at the end there. Paul is with Wholesome and directs all U.S. efforts of the Wholesome Foundation for Sustainable Construction. He works with senior leadership at the foundation based in Switzerland to effect change and sustainable strategy in the United States. Paul also directs U.S. efforts for the Wholesome Awards. It's an international competition that recognizes innovative projects and future-oriented concepts that stretch conventional notions about sustainable building and balancing environmental, social, and economic performance. I attended the Wholesome Awards a couple of years ago and was impressed by the economic leadership approach that this major international corporation is taking. So thank you.
Paul, is yours a PowerPoint or a PDF?
Thank you, Seth. Well, it's great to be here. It's me. Nope, that's not me. Wholesome's a cement manufacturer, and the Wholesome Awards are funded by Wholesome Group companies around the world. And it's funny, I spent a big part of my time at Wholesome promoting cement, but when I first got the Wholesome Awards, I didn't really know what it was about. And the more I looked into it, I came home and said to my wife, boy, this really changes everything. And I had a 7-year-old, and he said, does that mean I can have a pony? I'm like, okay, it doesn't change everything. We still have to maintain the foundation of what we do and how we do it. So I'm glad to be here, and what I want to do is talk a little bit about how the Wholesome Awards define sustainability and how diverse the term can actually be. Everybody recognizes this project in Seville, Spain. It's a beautiful, magnificent building. Its structure is perfect for the environment because it offers shade in areas, but it also offers this shops. It's become a central spot for the whole area. And you look at the aesthetics and you say, boy, this is a remarkable building, but it actually didn't win a Wholesome Award based on its aesthetics. It won because if you look at this photo on the right, look at how dense this area is and just how packed the housing is. And the jury, in their foresight, realized that what was needed in this area more than anything else was space, open space for people. And so this design came into play to actually offer quality of life. And look at what's happened. I mean, this is where everybody goes for political rallies, protests, New Year's parties. So it's not always about the building itself. Sometimes it's like good graphic design. It's that negative space around the building has as much of an impact as the building itself. Another example of just how diverse sustainability can be when we have all these tidal waters coming up and tsunamis. In Florida, one of the representatives, well, one of the award entries came up with this mangrove. If you've ever seen a mangrove root, it's this really gnarly root that intertwines to itself. And they ran all these computer models and showed that it really filters the water and breaks it down tremendously. So think about how applicable this could be in the Philippines or in Japan as these awful water events tend to do so much damage. And this is actually more on the resilient side. I mean, in the favelas in Brazil, this project, families would keep building over and over in the same area because that's just where their relatives were. And this building shored up all this clay because when the rains came in, the buildings would collapse and people would get buried alive. So this idea was to shore up the clay shelves, build this community structure where they can give vaccines, they can have a gymnasium, they can educate people on basic needs that they need to build better and just have a better quality of life. Finally, I mean, students tend to just show some of the most innovation. This is one of my favorite projects I've ever seen. It's a fog harvesting tower in Chile. They had very little rain, and what they did was the fog would come in on the coast in the morning and it would dissipate by noon. But it was the wind-driven fog would come through this structure and it would grab all the moisture into this fabric surrounding the skeleton and collect it down into a repository on the bottom. And then they grow all their own produce, vegetables on the base. And if you look on the right, I mean, this is a very arid area. There's no water to be found here, at least above ground. So great idea, very out-of-the-box thinking. And, you know, sustainability in the awards really has no size. It's not how big the project, it's how big the idea. And this is a project right here in San Francisco from the folks at Public Architecture. The same award went to the California Academy of Sciences the previous cycle, but the same project went to this, which was you go $500 million project to $70,000. So it's really not how big the project. And this gave a quality of life, dignity to day laborers. So it's just a wonderful project and a wonderful idea for people and the social aspect of sustainability. So again, it's not how big the project, it's how big the idea. And if you look at what's going to happen to 2050, we better focus more on people. I think that's a big part of what sustainable has to be. Again, Wholesome's a global company. We have a far reach. And by taking this one good idea that sits over here and being able to move it all over the world and share it with other people, I think that's how you really affect change, not just having it in one corner of the world. So that's where the awards, I think, is a tremendous value. This is a brief summary. We have the competition in 5 regions. Each region has its own prize money. And then the top 3 winners in each region go into a global competition where top prize is $250,000 for the global competition. And it's remarkable to see the juries, how they differ when you have a global jury versus a regional jury. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The U.S. may want clean green roofs, but Latin America wants clean water. So it's the same award really never wins twice. Again, a quick overview of the criteria, the evaluation process, but down the bottom is how the jury, and the jury is not done by Wholesome, it's done by our 2 partner universities, which is MIT and ETH in Zurich, Switzerland, and they've defined what sustainable is, and it's these 5 Ps down the bottom. So it's not a very tight nut, it's wide open, and it's really up to you how you see sustainability in this context. So I don't know how I'm doing on time, but here are the jury for the next cycle. And again, this is all the winning projects from the last cycle, or all the cycles combined. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Now I'd like to introduce Bruce King. Bruce is something of an icon. For the last 35 years, he's been at front and center in the sustainability movement. To quote engineer John Straub, Bruce King brings an engineer's steady perspective to the sometimes wild west of alternative building. He cuts through the wider claims of over-enthusiastic promoters and opens the eyes of conservative industry to the hidden value of traditional, indigenous, and truly innovative architecture. The application of his technical skills and human understanding to the challenges of alternative materials and construction has taken this field from the outlier to almost mainstream.
Thanks you, Seth, and thank you, AFH, for having me here today. Yeah, I'm basically a structural engineer. I've been designing buildings of every size and shape all over the world for 40 years now. Everything from high-rise buildings here in San Francisco with SOM 30 years ago to straw bale and adobe and bamboo all over the place, shipping containers and so on. I have not gotten around to designing some slides to show you for this morning, so I'm just going to talk to you. All of that work led me to start learning about indigenous and historic ways of building, which a lot of people, even in the building industry, tend to think of as mud huts and funky little grass shacks and things like that. But startling things came to light when I started to do that, such as the most famous and enduring concrete structures in the world are 1,800 years old and use no Portland cement. And I started digging into that as a structural engineer. Well, how did that happen? And how is it that if you hired a modern structural engineering firm to design a pantheon, it would not last even 1,000 years? It led me to discover whole cities in the Middle East that are 10 stories high and densely populated for the past 1,000 years and are built with nothing but clay and sand. So I get into a lot of interesting things. That led to starting the nonprofit Ecological Building Network, to doing a research program on straw bale construction, which led to a book and some work around the world. I've written an international ASTM building standard for earthen buildings. And we put on a conference a few years ago, the Build Well Conference, for people who are interested in talking about just the materials that we build with. What is this stuff we surround ourselves with every day? How healthy is it for me? How healthy is it for the planet? Can we do better? Can we create shelter? A building, after all, is a device to protect people and protect our stuff. That's what a building is. Can we do it without so much chemical residue, so much toxic residue here or someplace else on the planet we don't even see? And can we do it without burning so many fossil fuels? We had the first Build Well 3.5 years ago. It happened to just about coincide with the Haiti earthquake and led to myself and a lot of my colleagues going to Haiti and working there, to some extent, with Architecture for Humanity. That's a whole story in itself, but all over the world, from Port-au-Prince to Palo Alto, I see common themes in the building industry. Number one, people are very conservative with their money. They don't want to be the first people to try something. But also I saw that the biggest impediment was not a lack of new ideas or cool new materials or ways to build, but rather getting good information around and into the right hands. Whether you're in Port-au-Prince or in Palo Alto, I see people building $20 million houses. I work on them with them. And they build poisons into their house, and they just don't seem to care because maybe they don't know. I say, don't you care about your kids or crawling on the rug? And in Haiti, I saw people spending their very hard-earned cash buying some precious cement or rebar or a light bulb or something and using it in the wrong way and wasting their money. So part of my work is getting good information into the right hands. In light of that, we're building an online collaborative library of natural building where people can share information and post good engineering documents they have or URL links or whatever, so that if you want to work with straw bale or bamboo or shipping containers and find good information, what is its insulation value, what is their structural properties, you can go to the library and find stuff useful to you and see how it's rated. We're just starting to build this now. And we're also going to put on the next Build Well next spring over at Cavallo Point in Sausalito, just across the Golden Gate Bridge. So if you are a materials geek like myself or just interested in one way or another in the stuff of architecture, what we build, how we make a ceiling, a floor, and a structure and a wall, you might be interested. I have a bunch of cards in my pocket with QR codes on them, and you can read all about both the library and the conference. So my interest is in how do we build with what's around us, what's nearby, what requires the least amount of fuss but still delivers effective, safe shelter. I'm going to also add that I'm the father of an autistic son, and that's relevant here because he's 21 now and intellectually about 3. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the gist. And my working definition of autism is being in a state of incomplete or choked awareness of the life around you and choked off communication with the life around you. And having my son Tyler has made me aware that I have in fact grown up in an autistic economy, because we live in a state of autism relative to all the life around us. If we didn't, we wouldn't even have to have this conference. We wouldn't have to even declare design like you give a damn. We wouldn't have terms like sustainability or resilience because we would be living in a state of respect and affection for our relatives here on the planet. Somehow we fell out of whatever state of grace we might have been in, and we are behaving autistically on Earth. And I would submit that fundamentally what this panel, what this conference, what the work of green building and sustainability is about is recovering a healthy, respectful relation to our relatives here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. So our next panelist is Dr. Susan Clusterhouse. Dr. Clusterhouse is senior scientist at the Cradle-to-Cradle Products Innovation Institute. She's an environmental chemist with over 15 years of experience studying the fate and toxicity of chemical contaminants in the environment. And her current position is managing the Cradle-to-Cradle Certified Products Program and overseeing development of Cradle-to-Cradle Certified Product Standards. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Seth. And good morning, everyone. I just wanted to thank Architecture for Humanity for the invitation to be here, and certainly the opportunity to share the Cradle-to-Cradle vision with you, if you're not familiar with it. So before I get into what Cradle-to-Cradle is, I just wanted to take a minute to share with you how it is I got here, because I can tell you that 2 years ago, as an environmental chemist and studying the fate and the impacts of hazardous chemicals in the environment, I never predicted that I would be at a design conference, honestly. And so what happened was I was actually, for the past 5 years prior to my position at Cradle-to-Cradle, I was studying environmental contamination here in San Francisco Bay, writing research papers about contamination in the environment in my little corner office, and realizing that here we are spending millions of dollars to monitor chemicals that are already in the environment, and really becoming frustrated with the little impact that, we'd write papers, it would go into this faraway place in academic journals where no one really seemed to pay that much attention. It had some impact, but I became frustrated and wanted to have a bigger impact. And so ultimately, as you know, the reason that we have chemicals in our environment is because one of the main reasons is because we have chemicals in the products that we use every day. And so I essentially turned to Cradle-to-Cradle as a way to help manufacturers make better decisions about the chemicals that they put in their products to begin with, because that's obviously the way that we can start to get rid of them out of our environment. So what is Cradle-to-Cradle? So just really briefly, I'm sure, hopefully you've read the book. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. You'll never look at a material or a product in the same way again. The book Cradle-to-Cradle, Remaking the Way We Make Things, came out in 2002. It was written by Bill McDonough and Michael Braungart. They're the founders of what we have today as the Cradle-to-Cradle concept. And in essence, Cradle-to-Cradle is a practice and a design philosophy. And so it's essentially a systematic approach to the way you design and manufacture materials. And over time, it has evolved into a quality standard. Okay, so at its essence, I don't have very much time, but at its essence, Cradle-to-Cradle is about designing materials for reuse. And so this is not cradle to grave, but cradle to cradle, reusing these materials in the cradle to cradle speak in two different cycles. So materials are nutrients, and so nutrients can be cycled in one of two different metabolisms, either the biological cycle or the technical cycle. And so in the biological cycle, that's meant to be for non-toxic or compostable or biodegradable materials that are continuously reused. An example of a biological nutrient would be shampoo or a personal care product. The technical cycle is designing for disassembly. So you can disassemble your materials so that they can be recycled, or even better, upcycled into a new product. And so an example of a technical nutrient, a product containing technical nutrients would be, for example, an office chair or a carpet tile. And so really the overall goal, again, is not only designing for reuse, but designing those materials so they don't have hazardous chemicals in them. We don't want to continuously reuse materials that already have additives that are harmful to us. And ideally, another key aspect is that you're recycling materials so that they retain the value into that next cradle, and perhaps even increasing in value as they travel through the cycle. And so in 2005, Bill McDonough and Michael Braungart created the Cradle-to-Cradle certification program as a way to reward achievement in cradle-to-cradle design. So their two companies, MBDC and EPEA in Germany, have been working with over 150 companies over the last 15 years to help them design following the cradle-to-cradle principles. And you can just see a sampling of those brands here. And this evolved into the cradle-to-cradle product standard. So obviously, two firms aren't going to do it when you want to scale up the number of cradle-to-cradle products in our world. And so Bill and Michael realized that in order to do this, they really needed to have an independent, nonprofit organization that could administer the program. And so in 2010, the Cradle-to-Cradle Products Innovation Institute was born. And so we are now responsible for administering that certification program and have been granted the exclusive license to the methodology for Cradle-to-Cradle. And just really quickly, to show you that there's 5 elements of the Cradle-to-Cradle product standard, as you see here. These are based on the Cradle-to-Cradle design principles. They focus on the health and safety of the materials and their reuse, and then as well as the energy and water use and social fairness aspects that are used to manufacture that product. And then lastly, a unique feature of the Cradle-to-Cradle standard and program is that we reward and encourage continual improvement over time. And so we certify products with under 5 different certification levels, as you see there. We really want to strive for gold and platinum products, but we reward achievement at the lower levels with the intent and commitment from these manufacturers that they're going to make their products better over time, and they have to prove that to us every time they recertify their product. So there you have it. I encourage you to learn more about Cradle to Cradle. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And finally, we have Paolo Fernandez. Paolo is a Portuguese registered architect, has worked in several architecture studios in Barcelona, and developed his own research around sustainability, natural materials, and bioclimatic change and design. Paolo specialized in earth architecture and sustainable development at Cradle Institute in France, and was a design fellow with Architecture for Humanity on the Community Center in Manica, Mozambique. Welcome.
Thank you all for coming. Yeah. Okay. This is about a process of working together with the community in Africa during 16 months. This work was developed in Manica, a small village in the mountains of Mozambique in the eastern part of Africa. Manica was chosen because there is an organization called GDM that works closely with 3,000 children, most of them orphans, and develops education and social activities through life skills, sports and computer lessons. In a context where there is lack of proper education and employment, people look for any kind of job, any kind of work, and most of these jobs are very precarious, very dangerous, such as gold mining. People sometimes go, and children as well, go as deep as 10 meters without safety measures, helmets, or any kind of these things. And besides these social and economical problems, there is a big environmental problem, deforestation. Manica is the highest point of deforestation in the whole Mozambique. People use a massive amount of wood to fire clay bricks. And so how to improve this, how to build a community center and reduce deforestation. During 2 months before the construction of the building, the community center, we proposed to the community itself give some training and to establish a line of production of clay bricks, compressed earth bricks, without using wood to fire these bricks. So this line of production still exists today and is a very important new source of income for the community. we have proposed as well as an alternative wood use to the wood. We proposed the use of bamboo, and to work together with local artisans and to reestablish the craft works in the region. This kind of craft works are almost disappearing in Mozambique. So the building is a contemporary design, but that is completely open, and it integrates local cultural aspects. That is very important for the resilience and the self-esteem of the community. And at the end, it was very amazing. It was really, really amazing to see how the workers were happy to complete the building itself, but as well to receive certificates for participating in the building, from the training in the brick production till the construction. It was very important in a world, in a context where there isn't proper education or any kind of easy access to universities. So the building works as vernacular architecture, uses vernacular architecture bioclimatic principles like cross ventilation and natural local materials to integrate calmly in the landscape. So in spite of all these problems, environmental, social and economical problems, the community and people there are always facing life with a big smile, always very happy. And they were very proud of being part of all this process, and they were our main motivation for this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Great introductions. I think the next thing, I'd like to get each of you maybe to share your own view of what the word sustainable, and contrast it with resilient in your view. Whatever order.
We had a conference call amongst us a few days ago, and said, yeah, well, what is the difference between sustainability and resilience? And as it occurred to me anyway, that there's quite a distinction. Some of us were thinking, well, maybe they're really kind of the same thing, but I submitted that they're not, because sustainability, as in building design or more generally, is about basically not ripping off future generations, not leaving them with less resources or energy or open space or whatever than I have. Pretty basic fundamental. There's many versions of that definition that are floating around for sustainability. Resilience is different, at least as I understand it. Climate change is happening. It's not, we're no longer preparing for or trying to avert climate change. It is happening. There's the biggest hurricane apparently in recorded history occurring right now. It's probably already over the Philippines and headed for Asia. And so you hear talk about building seawalls around New York and about keeping the rising seas and the worst storms at bay. And honestly, I think some of them are kind of dumb, because they're Band-Aids. And some of them, like the mangrove swamp that Paul showed us, letting nature do the work for us, as nature knows how to do far better than we do. But resilience means allowing for the fact that we've already kind of screwed up, and we have to start designing our buildings and our communities and all of our systems that we depend on to allow for the fact that the climate is changing and we're having more disruptive events that we have to account for with our buildings and with our communities. One quick little quote that I got a few years ago. I was at the Bioneers Conference. Some of you may be familiar with it. It happens up in Marin every fall. And Stuart Brand, the legendary forward thinker and author of the Whole Earth Catalog, was there. And a comment, the panel session was about, it might have been about peak oil or climate change, I'm not sure what, but something about the future looks ugly, what do we do about it? And somebody asked Stuart Brand, as the author of the Whole Earth Catalog, and somebody knows a few things about effective tools, what is the most important technology that I can have to prepare for a changing world, a changing climate, for the changes that are, the heavy changes that are coming down? And he said, your neighbors. Your neighbors. Yeah, we need solar panels. Yes, we need water collection. Yes, we need to learn how to treat our wastes. Yes, we need to do all of that stuff. Organic gardens, blah, 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 blah. But absolutely the first thing is we're social primates. We rely on each other. And I'll be the first to say, I'm the materials geek, I'm the engineer, but technological solutions are sort of at the end of the caboose. The first thing is, how do we work together? How do we recover our sense of community? And on every level, on every sense of the word. To me, that's what is implicit in the term resilience.
Thank you, Bruce.
I think, me personally, from what I've seen at the awards, I'm not an expert, but I work with a lot of experts at the foundation, and sustainability is more of a mindset. I think when you have to have it in the back of your head. We've seen these terms go from green building. It was on everybody's booth at Green Build. You'd have, we're green building, we're sustainable. You see lead out there, you see performance. So these terms tend to overwhelm us. But I think at the end of the day, sustainable construction, sustainable building is a mindset. Excuse me. I think resilience is more is an evolving term as well. I think that it can be. It's been looked at a lot of how do we repair something that's happened. But I think the better philosophy would be, how do we be smarter? How do we stop these things before they happen? And I think true resilience has to be more early thinking, and as opposed to how do we fix it. It's how do we plan for it coming, and not how do we fix it after it's already taken place.
Okay, thanks. To be honest, the difference between the two terms is not something that I've ever thought about. As in my previous work, primarily focusing on the science, on the technology side. But I can say the cradle-to-cradle philosophy inherently goes beyond both of those terms. I mean, of course, I think sustainability is great, and we need that, and I agree that it's a mindset and something that's substantially and quickly evolving. In the cradle-to-cradle mindset, yes, the goal is to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals, to reduce emissions, to reduce the amount of water we use. But it really goes a step further in at least what we strive for in our standard, which is just a tool to encourage people to reach what we call the platinum ideal, which is taking it a step further. Yes, gold certified is fantastic, but we really, and we don't have any platinum certified products yet, but we really want to encourage manufacturers to take the extra step, to actively recover and reuse materials in an active cycle. You produce more renewable energy than you need for the products that you're manufacturing, making the water quality around you better than it was when you started your manufacturing process. And then, of course, taking the supply chain or the social issues all the way through the supply chain. So I guess the way I think about it is that we're not just designing for reuse and sustainability, but we really need to, sustainability and resilience, but we really need to design for reuse and safer chemicals as we reuse those products. Take it a step further for improving and leaving a beneficial footprint.
Thank you, Susan.
So sustainable, in a very simple definition, can be the balance of economical, social, environmental, and cultural factors. So sustainable can be a way of living without jeopardize one of these factors. For example, if in a process a community for living increases too much the economical preoccupations, this balance will be unbalanced, and so the environmental factors will be not a primary preoccupation or issue. Resilience, I think it's the way a community, the tools that community can have to preserve their own lives. So the flexibility that a community can have to live a sustainable way. I don't know if it was clear.
Thank you. I have a question. I think it's actually good for Susan and Paul. Both of you are working with larger corporations and businesses. For a profit-driven company like Wholesome, You're very publicly active in promoting the need for finding a viable balance between economic growth, social, environmental health. And you view at Wholesome this approach as a good business model as well as the right thing to do. And I would assume, Susan, you're working with companies to get them to have the same view. Can you each talk a bit about advice you can give to other materials manufacturers and harvesters that might help them reach similar conclusions as Wholesome?
Sure, I think that's a great question. Wholesome struggles with this all the time. I mean, cement is a large producer of CO2. 5% actually globally comes out of the cement manufacturing business. But almost 50% comes out of the built environment. So we know as a company it's our role to try to influence the future built environment. But as a company, you know, we've made huge investments on building plants that are on the Mississippi River. We spent $1.5 billion on a plant because it's more sustainable to ship that cement via barge than it is to ship it by trucks or by rail, just the emissions alone. We've also, we have companies, Geocycle, it's part of Wholesome, and as a corporate social responsibility, it's our job to actually find better ways to produce energy, keep these kilns running. And the things like toys, poison toys, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, things that would end up in landfills go into the kilns. And because once you throw something in a kiln at 2,000 degrees, it becomes energy and anything burns. So, you know, every company is different, and the amount of investment that they make in being a better company, a cleaner company, even regardless of what the industry is, I think speaks to the volume of what social responsibility should be. And the Wholesome Foundation and the awards is just another leg on that stool of what we can all do to try to make a difference and try to influence the way things are done in a better way.
I think this one's on too. So I don't work with the companies directly. We have assessment bodies that act as the consultants to help manufacturers one-on-one develop their products, and then they submit those reports to us for certification. So I'm not well versed on the actual economic benefits specifically, but I can give you some examples of, I know, for example, Shaw Carpet has a very high percentage of their revenue from Cradle-to-Cradle certified products. And so, I mean, these are some of our legacy Cradle-to-Cradle manufacturers that have been working and designing according to these principles for 10 years or more. I can also tell you that I hear stories about that, you know, once a company starts to think in the cradle-to-cradle way, it just definitely slowly permeates to the rest of their products and the rest of their company. And I've heard that they've actually seen benefits despite the economic downturn. And so we are commissioning, as we speak, an impact study to try and determine what the benefits of cradle-to-cradle certification have been for the many companies. And so we're hearing that the results are positive, so we'll be able to share that in a while.
Great, thank you both. For Paolo, and I think maybe for Bruce as well, in working in rural locations with communities who are not, say, in the developed world, there's often a challenge in introducing materials that are not in the magazines or not what they communities think they are aspiring to. And there's a rejection of alternatives or using materials that they have at hand. Could you talk to your experience in how you approach introducing materials that would otherwise feel lesser to those communities?
Yes, when we first proposed to the community the use of soil, bricks made by soil, people usually start to be very suspicious about it because, okay, you're arriving from outside of our country, an organization known, so what are you proposing of new to us? Something that we have here for the last 500 years. And they were very suspicious because earth bricks are used there. But at the same time, they were curious because people are losing, and with the civil war, a big civil war in Mozambique, they lost the knowledge of building properly with earth bricks and natural materials. So people are mixing techniques with techniques that come and are importations from the exterior, and with their own techniques. So sometimes it's really a disaster. And part of our job there was to clarify a little bit kind of this what we could do with local materials in a simple way. So we started to do training with them and to make tests with the community, like resistance tests, to show that local materials can be as good as other materials, and it will be easy for them if they use these materials, and it will be simple, and they will achieve much more with that. So at the end, they incorporate that, and they were very proud of showing their own culture, their own aspects in this way.
Some years ago, I was hired to work on a very high-end house down in Silicon Valley for this wonderful couple, venture capitalists and great people, and I ended up doing all sorts of things with them. And I learned a little bit about their business. And one of the things Paul taught me was that as a venture capitalist, people come and pitch him all the time, many times every day, with some new idea that sounds really cool. But as soon as he hears that it involves changing people's behavior, they're out the door, they're gone. Not that it doesn't happen, it happens all the time, and it's going to be happening more and more. But a venture capitalist doesn't want to invest in something that depends on people doing something differently. And I see that all over the world, from the developing world to here. My colleagues introduced straw bale construction in Mongolia and northern China. Well, that started 20 years ago, and people kept going, and they'd build a little bit here, a little bit there, and it was a little bit like Paolo's experience. The same thing happens over and over again. People don't want to try something new, and they certainly don't want to go backwards. They wanted to have brick buildings in China, so my colleague said, great, let's build a straw bale house, and we'll put the plaster on it, and we'll score in pretend mortar joints, and we'll make it look like a brick building. And they said, great, and that's what they did. And now the state of that is that the Chinese government is promoting straw bale construction all across several of the northern provinces, because they've already measured 2 identical houses, one made of brick, one made of straw bale, and one burns a pile of coal as big as this room in the course of a winter, and the other one burns a pile of coal like that. And so they're sold. But they still score it to make it look like brick, because that's what people want. When I first started getting into this alternative building stuff, I wrote a little book called Buildings of Earth and Straw for rammed earth and straw bale construction. And I had this colleague in the UK who invited me to come speak at Queen's University in Belfast, North Ireland, so I went, and it was an adventure in itself. But he arranged for me to speak on Good Morning Belfast, sort of their equivalent of Michael Krasny, right, for him. And I go down to the BBC studio, and they rush me in there and go through, I get frisked 3 times and all this security, blah, blah, blah. And I finally plopped down with 10 seconds to spare, and this very cheerful, garrulous Irish lady's on the air and say, well, it looks like another rainy day in Belfast, everybody. But we have here with us in California Bruce King, who's just written Buildings of Earth and Straw, will be speaking at Queen's University tonight. And she wheels around in her desk and gives me a big smile and says, so Bruce, it took us thousands of years to get out of these mud huts. Why would we want to get back in them? But that's the gist. There's the cultural perception that this stuff is going backwards, and people want to go forwards. They want to be modern. They want to live in the kind of houses and be in the kind of buildings that they see on TV, which is produced in LA. And the same story recurs over and over again in every part of the world. Paolo's got 1 million stories, so do I, and it's exactly the same story. So how do you introduce change where people can't see the benefit? And there's the whole psychology of how you do change human beings culturally and individually, but things will have to change. Paul's industry, I hope what I said earlier didn't make you think I was slamming cement. Cement is a really cool building material, but as Wholesome very well knows, it takes a lot of energy, it puts carbon in the air, so can we do better than that? And a lot of people are thinking about that. We're going to have to change. We're going to have to change the way we make concrete, the way we make all our materials and products, and the way we make our buildings at every scale of the thing, from the chemical scale that Susan works at to the community scale that Seth works at, and everything in between. But how do you change people is a tough one. And there is no simple answer, but basically we need salesmen. you were telling, Paul was telling me how he was in advertising before he went to Wholesome, and you were kind of saying something self-deprecating about it because you're selling stuff. I no longer see it that way. I wish we had ad people and salesmen in natural building and in sustainability who could go out there and pitch this and show people, like in the community in Mozambique, this stuff is good, right? Because essentially you had to sell it to them. You knew it was good, I know it's good, but they didn't know that. So bring on the salesman, bring them in. Give them the right stuff to sell.
Great. This is for anyone who wants to. I think it goes for all four of you. You're each defining sustainable and resilient, kind of sharp distinction between those two words and what they mean. So as experts in the innovative use of materials, can you compare and contrast how you see the use of indigenous materials and methods differing from that of high-tech materials in addressing sustainability and resilience?
I think as a manufacturer, we know that fly ash is out there. There's nothing else you can do with it. It comes from the coal industry. We've realized that it's got cementitious properties, so we introduced that to Portland. In many cases, it acts as strong, or if not stronger. Same with slag, which comes from the steel industry. And recently, the big push on cements is to go to this PLC. You'll see a lot of it coming out, which is the Portland limestone cements. So you can actually replace a lot of the cement with actual limestone. And you're going to see a lot of ads from Wholesome coming out because we think that's the right thing to do. And I think that's a big part of when you look at sustainability. It's just you're doing the right thing. Every industry has its warts and its bruises, but I think every industry can do better, regardless of what it is. And we know we can, and it's kind of a Swiss culture, right, is to do the right thing, and that's what we try to do.
That's a dangerous question to ask me, Seth. I could go all day on that one.
Maybe pass the microphone to another.
I should just abdicate. But one quick thing is that being familiar with both, I've worked with very high-tech materials on aircraft remodels in Miami. I mean, I really have run the gamut in my career. It just has turned out that way, and playing old Adobe and rammed earth and everything in between. And different things are appropriate at different times. My daughter-in-law in Fairbanks came and said, we want to build a straw bale house in Fairbanks. And I said, don't. It's a bad idea. It's just not the right thing for the job. And I know I understand you're trying to be green and so on, but it's really not the right fit. And they did something else. But the thing about high-tech is that it's not a magic bullet. There's going to be a lot of cool new stuff invented. We're going to find out better ways to make cement. We're going to find out better ways to make electronic devices and so on. But very often what I see in the built environment in design meetings with people is say, we'll have more controls and be ever fancier about how the fan is running and how the lights are controlled and all of that. And so far, we mostly make a mess of things. And in the course of doing so, create all these circuit boards and wires and polymers and things that Susan can tell you a whole lot more than I could about. Your average, my iPhone in my pocket probably has 100 different petrochemical polymers that comprise it. The supply chain with tens of thousands of points all over the planet. Toxic metals, so on and so forth. It's a cool device, and I hope I use it to good purpose, but it has an impact out there. So when you choose high-tech, when you choose another electronic system or control or something that requires another line of wires through your building, think about it carefully, because very often we're tearing up somebody's mountainside to get that copper, or we're putting something nasty in the air to get that particular polymer. So my instinct is keep it simple. Keep it really simple.
Yeah, I would just say, it is about doing the right thing and convincing companies to do the right thing and making those better choices. But one thing that we haven't talked about is that we can do something in creating the demand for companies to innovate and force them to innovate. We have smart people out there. They have the ability to do things differently and make better products. But what we're hearing is that there just simply isn't a demand. People will say, yes, I want a green product, but they're not following through with their dollars and buying that. So that's something that we need to do to drive that innovation. But regarding indigenous materials, I mean, it's about choosing the right materials. I think there are good indigenous natural materials. There are good synthetic materials. But it's about making design choices when you're at the very beginning of the design process. Much more difficult, obviously, to go back, realize you have a hazardous chemical in your product, have to figure out what the alternatives are for a better a chemical that has the same functional use. It's definitely not as easy. So that's why we're actually trying to really make an effort to work with small businesses to get them and to encourage them to get the cradle-to-cradle thinking as part of their process from the beginning.
In terms of high-tech, I think we can solve lots of problems with high-tech design. The thing is that the way to achieve that those solutions maybe it doesn't compensate all the effort in terms of environmental issues. I think it's what we are discussing here. But of course, we are in a point of transition probably of decreasing a bit the high effort of industries in high tech or high industrial materials as concrete or aluminium that have a big footprint. At the same time, I think it's logical that we have to think projects from the beginning. The new projects we have to think from the beginning, all the footprint that can have, all the implications that can have in the future. And it's complex, of course, because there are so many industries, we all depend on so many things that we cannot cut in one moment on this. I think we have to make a transition slowly and to have a compromise in a medium and long term, what is difficult, but I think it's like this.
Terrific, thank you. We're close to the end. Huh? I think rather than asking more questions, which would go over probably, perhaps open it up to the audience for if you have questions. I think there's someone with a mic, a volunteer with a mic, and yes, thank you. Any questions for the panel? There's one.
Hi, my name is Yaila. My question will go in, you mentioned resilient and sustainability in the industry level, such as the concrete production and so forth, and also in community level. I would like to know what your opinions are on the legislative, what the government can do, and doing the right thing, whether it should be a certification that also comes with a high price, or it should be just the right thing to do that is enforced by law, because then it will affect both of those industry, both of those community and also the industry. Thank you. What your thoughts on government level and more working on the legislative level, that this is the right thing to do and government steps in and steps in to make it right.
We've seen the government come up with laws for cement manufacturers called the NESHAP, but we were already ahead of it. I think a lot of industries understand what's coming before it actually comes from the government, because the government takes so long to actually put these things together. So I think at the end of the day, it comes back to what you can do better as an industry, as an individual. I think the cradle-to-cradle stuff is terrific. You know, LEED has its issues where you put a recycled carpet on a concrete floor and you get more points, but at the same time you're adding more materials to a building. So I think this cradle-to-cradle, I can't wait to read that book. I think that sounds fascinating. I'd love to know more how it affects an industry like ours. But I think that's the type of certification we need that's actually measurable and proven, and it's actually vetted.
I can just follow up with that. Yeah, I guess honestly, I've kind of given up on the federal level regulations. Luckily, the state of California and other progressive states are taking action to get us better products or to ensure that we have better products. But I think the biggest thing we can do is something like LEED has done, is offered the points for making sure, or offering points for manufacturers that want to disclose the ingredients in their products, or making efforts to optimize the chemicals out of their products over time. And so Cradle is now recognized in version 4 of LEED that's coming out. But another big way is for governments to put Cradle or other similar certifications on their public product procurement lists. It goes back to demanding it. If we have leadership, their leadership, to demand that we have better products, I think that's really the most positive thing they can do to make a big impact.
At the BuildWell conference I mentioned, we will have people from the federal and state and local level talking about their efforts to do that, to legislate or to write regulations or standards for better behavior. As having worked a little bit with building standards, writing an ASTM building standard, I can tell you it's just arduous. There's a whole story in itself, but it takes a long time. It's slow. It's very imperfect. And in general, because it ends up being consensus-based, or at least there's a lot of stakeholders involved that have to be accommodated, then it takes a long time and it's imperfect and nobody's happy with it. But if you can have influence at any level like that, do so, because it has a lot of leverage. The higher up you can go on the chain and push on the lever, the more effective you can be. But don't wait for somebody to do that. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do at the grassroots level, like your purchasing behavior. If everybody insisted on C2C certified products, that would change things pretty quick. So there's a lot we can do as individual buyers and professionals in the building industry to move things along. And in fact, there's a grassroots effort happening. And you don't read about it in the newspapers, but it certainly is happening.
Terrific. I think we're at the end, yes? Okay, great. I want to thank our panelists, Paul and Bruce and Susan and Paolo. Terrific conversation.
Thank you. We're really close up here. Thanks, all of you. So I just wanted to say the conversation will continue in the breakout room, which is this way, right behind us. So if you want to ask more questions, our panelists will be happy to answer them, right? Thank you guys so much. That was really fascinating. So our next panel is population shocks, and it'll start at 11 back in this room. So we'll see you.